Hey there, this is Alexis Knight. Welcome to True Crime, the Court of Public Opinion. I'm your host, guiding you through cases that have moved through the courts and reached a conclusion, but left the public divided. These are not your typical cut and dried cases. These are the ones where the facts may be clear, but the truth? Well, that's another story. Now imagine this. You are a hardworking professional, a prison nurse, devoted to helping those who society deems dangerous and unworthy of trust. Your days are filled with stress, but then someone notices you, a prisoner who seems different, charming and attentive, and somehow able to break through the barriers you've carefully built. And slowly your professional boundaries blur. And before you know it, you're being asked for favors. Small ones at first, but then something much larger. Well, that's the dilemma at the heart of this case. Amy Hatfield, a prison nurse in the UK, found herself caught up in a web of manipulation and deceit. She was persuaded to smuggle drugs into HMP Lindholm Prison by Joseph Whittingham, an inmate who used emotional and psychological tactics to influence her. The drugs, including synthetic cannabis known as spice, not only wreaked havoc among the prisoners, but also resulted in several inmate deaths. Was Amy Hatfield a victim of Whittingham's manipulative control, or did she willingly cross a line, knowing full well the consequences of her actions? The case raises difficult questions about that line between free will and coercion. And in this episode, we're going to explore how a professional relationship devolved into a criminal partnership, the devastating consequences of their actions, and the broader implications for those working in high-risk environments. By the end of this episode, you're going to have the chance to decide for yourself. Was Amy Hatfield a pawn in Whittingham's game, or did she choose her own fate? Okay, now that we've set the stage here, let's dive into what actually happened in this case and how Amy Hatfield, a respected prison nurse, became entangled in a criminal conspiracy. Amy Hatfield worked at HMP Lindholm, a prison in South Yorkshire in the UK. Known for her professionalism, she had a solid reputation among her colleagues. However, everything changed when she met Joseph Whittingham, an inmate serving time for serious offenses. Described as charismatic and manipulative, Whittingham began to build a rapport with Hatfield, breaking through the professional barriers she had maintained. The relationship between the two gradually shifted from professional to personal. Whittingham used emotional manipulation, portraying himself as a victim of the system and showering Hatfield with attention she may have been craving. And over time, his requests escalated from small personal favors to smuggling contraband into the prison. Now, Hatfield complied, initially smuggling items like cigarettes, but then the stakes grew higher when Whittingham asked her to smuggle spice, a synthetic cannabis known for its potent and dangerous effects. Hatfield concealed the drugs during her shifts and delivered them to Whittingham, who distributed them throughout the prison. The consequences were catastrophic. The introduction of spice into the prison led to widespread addiction among inmates, severe medical emergencies, and even fatalities. Several prisoners died from overdoses linked to the drug, raising alarms about how such substances were entering the supposed secured facility. When the case went to trial, the prosecution focused on Hatfield's betrayal of her duties as a prison nurse, presenting evidence of incriminating text messages and financial transfers between her and Whittingham. The defense argued that Whittingham had exploited Hatfield's vulnerabilities, coercing her into actions she would not have taken otherwise. But the court ultimately found Hatfield guilty, sentencing her to over 10 years in prison for her role in smuggling drugs. Whittingham, already serving time, received additional charges for organizing this whole scheme, and the outcome left many divided. While Hatfield's actions were undeniable, questions remained about the degree of influence Whittingham held over her and whether her sentence was overly harsh, given the circumstances of her entire situation. Now, stick with me here as we unravel the arguments that were presented by both sides during the trial and examine why this case continues to provoke such heated debate. Okay, well, to understand how this case unfolded, we need to look at the environment where it all took place. HMP Lindholm, a Category C prison housing inmates with varying levels of risk. As a prison nurse, Amy Hatfield was part of a system designed to provide health care to individuals serving sentences often under challenging conditions. Hatfield's professional life changed dramatically when she crossed paths with Joseph Whittingham. Described as a calculating and charismatic criminal, Whittingham had a history of manipulating those around him. Witnesses later described how Whittingham had targeted Hatfield, beginning with small talk during routine medical checkups and escalating to personal conversations. And over time, these interactions built a level of trust, or perhaps dependency, that allowed him to blur the lines of professionalism. Hatfield's descent into criminal behavior started subtly. Investigators discovered that her initial smuggling activities were minor, involving items like tobacco or unauthorized food. Seemingly harmless items. Seemingly. But Whittingham, understanding how to exploit her vulnerabilities, escalated his requests. Now that she was being trained, the introduction of spice into the prison not only fueled addiction among inmates, but created chaos for staff, leading to medical emergencies and even deaths. During the trial, prosecutors presented compelling evidence of Hatfield's involvement. Financial records showed unexplained deposits in her account, while text messages revealed her complicity in arranging deliveries to the prison. Hatfield admitted her actions, but claimed she was manipulated by Whittingham, who she said threatened her and played on her emotions. This case also raises a critical question. Are people in high-risk professions like prison nurses adequately trained to handle situations where manipulation and influence could compromise their judgment? Should this be a requirement in order to enable you to even handle your job? While prison staff undergo general training, the specific challenges of building resilience against manipulation often go unaddressed. What additional safeguards could prevent incidents like this? Well, the jury found Hatfield guilty, citing her knowledge of the consequences of smuggling drugs and her continued participation despite the risks. Her sentence was seen as a warning to others in similar positions, but it also sparked a discussion about whether she was given sufficient tools to even protect herself from being influenced by criminals like this overall. As we continue, we're going to explore the prosecution and defense arguments in greater depth and examine how this case sheds light on the vulnerabilities of those in high-risk jobs. As this investigation unfolded, the full scale of the operation orchestrated by Joseph Whittingham became apparent. Spice, the synthetic cannabis that was smuggled into HMP Lindholm, had devastating effects. This is marijuana that's not. It is synthetic cannabis, and people used this quite casually when it came out, and it really did have devastating effects everywhere it was. And inside this prison was no different. The drug's notorious for its unpredictable and often dangerous side effects, including severe hallucinations, aggression, and sudden death. So if you can imagine, within the prison, its presence caused medical emergencies that overwhelmed staff, It was confusing. It placed both inmates and officers at risk. Amy Hatfield's role in the operation was pivotal. Evidence revealed that she made multiple deliveries, hiding packets of spice in her medical bag and passing them to Whittingham during her shifts. Surveillance footage and intercepted phone calls provided damning proof of her complicity. Investigators described the operation as carefully coordinated, with Whittingham using other inmates to distribute the drugs and keep his hands clean. And during the trial, the prosecution highlighted the catastrophic impact of Hatfield's actions. They painted a picture of a professional who betrayed her duty, not just to the prison system, but to the society that relied on her to maintain order. The financial transactions and communications left little room for doubt that Hatfield was knowingly involved in smuggling contraband. Hatfield's defense centered on her claim of manipulation. Her legal team argued that Whittingham had exploited her trust and created a psychological dependency. They pointed out her lack of prior criminal history and emphasized the power dynamics at play. Whittingham's ability to manipulate her emotionally while simultaneously instilling fear of exposure. One of the most striking revelations from the trial was the lack of specific training for staff like Hatfield to handle manipulative inmates. While prison staff are trained in general security measures, the psychological tactics used by inmates like Whittingham often fall outside the scope of standard preparation. And this gap left Hatfield vulnerable and raises questions about whether additional training could have prevented her involvement. Now, in the end, the jury sided with the prosecution, finding Hatfield guilty of multiple charges. She was sentenced to more than a decade in prison, while Whittingham faced additional charges for his role. This case not only underscores the consequences of crossing professional boundaries, but also highlights the need for better support and training for those in high-risk professions. Remember, in trials, it takes one or many psychological professionals, psychiatrists, psychologists, degrees all over the place to determine what is wrong with people on trial and the crimes that they commit, what is going on, and how they can be handled. Yet a prison guard just shows up to work that day, they have their lunch, they know when their breaks are. How do they know how to handle this person that just went through all of that, and it took all those professionals to figure them out? And now you turn them over to a prison guard. How do they know what to do? Is this a fair question? The trial of Amy Hatfield and Joseph Whittingham presented a stark clash of narratives, with the prosecution and defense painting vastly different pictures of what transpired. For the prosecution, the case was straightforward. Amy Hatfield knowingly betrayed her duty as a prison nurse by engaging in criminal activities that had devastating consequences. They emphasized her active role in smuggling drugs into the prison, pointing to overwhelming evidence, including text messages, financial transactions, and surveillance footage. The prosecution argued that Hatfield's actions demonstrated clear intent, that she was not simply a victim of manipulation. One of the prosecution's key points was the impact of her actions. By introducing spice into the prison, Hatfield contributed to widespread addiction, severe medical emergencies, and even fatalities among inmates. They described the ripple effects of her decisions, which placed not only inmates, but also staff and the entire prison environment at risk. The prosecution framed Hatfield as someone who prioritized personal gain over her professional responsibilities, choosing to engage in illegal activities despite knowing the potential consequences. On the other side, though, the defense sought to humanize Hatfield and highlight the complex psychological factors at play. They argued that she was a victim of Joseph Whittingham's manipulation, pointing to his history of exploiting others to achieve his goals. The defense portrayed Whittingham as a master manipulator who exploited Hatfield's vulnerabilities, preying on her emotional needs and coercing her into actions she would not have otherwise considered. The defense also emphasized Hatfield's previously unblemished record as a nurse, arguing that this incident was not indicative of her character, but rather a tragic outcome of her entanglement with Whittingham. They urged the jury to consider the power dynamics at play, where Whittingham held significant influence over Hatfield and used threats and emotional manipulation to control her actions. This battle of perspectives, it left the jury with a very difficult decision. Was Hatfield a willing participant in Whittingham's scheme, or was she another victim of his manipulative tactics? As the trial progressed, both sides continued to dig deeper into the psychological and ethical complexities of the case. The defense's case hinged on framing Amy Hatfield as a vulnerable individual who had been systematically exploited by Joseph Whittingham. To support this narrative, they presented expert testimony on the psychological tactics used by manipulators to gain control over others. Psychologists called to the stand explained how individuals like Whittingham often employ a combination of charm and threats and emotional dependence to erode a person's sense of autonomy. Now, in Hatfield's case, the defense argued that Whittingham positioned himself as both a confidant and a threat, creating a situation where she felt trapped. They suggested that Whittingham had studied Hatfield's emotional weaknesses and then used them to gain her trust before escalating his demands. And then to further bolster their case, the defense highlighted the lack of institutional safeguards to protect employees like Hatfield. They argued that prison staff and nurses, while trained in security protocols, are not equipped to identify or resist the subtle manipulations of inmates like Whittingham. This oversight, they claimed, placed Hatfield in a vulnerable position with little support to navigate the ethical dilemmas she faced. The prosecution, however, countered this argument with hard evidence and pointed to the financial transactions that suggested Hatfield was not merely coerced, but actively profited from her involvement. The records showed a pattern of unexplained deposits in her account that coincided with the smuggling operation. These financial incentives, the prosecution argued, undermined the defense's claims that Hatfield had acted solely out of fear or manipulation. Additionally, the prosecution questioned Hatfield's continued participation in the scheme, even as the consequences of her actions became evident. They highlighted that several inmates suffered severe medical emergencies and that Hatfield, as a nurse, would have been acutely aware of the harm caused by spice. This knowledge, they argued, made her actions even more egregious. But the defense rebutted by emphasizing the cumulative impact of Whittingham's influence, arguing that Hatfield felt there was no way to extricate herself without severe personal and professional repercussions. They urged the jury to view her actions through the lens of coercion rather than criminal intent. This clash of arguments laid bare the complexities of the case. Was Amy Hatfield a manipulative participant? Or was she a professional caught in a web of influence beyond her control? And this case didn't just spark legal debates. It raised bigger questions about responsibility and vulnerability and the systems meant to protect people in high-risk professions. One of the most significant points of controversy here was the perception of Amy Hatfield herself. And again, we're dealing with perception here. Perception is personal to the person perceiving. Very hard to understand that within each other. We know we agree sometimes, but we can never get the full perception of another. And people were confused about Amy. Public opinion was sharply divided. Some saw her as a victim. She was a dedicated professional who was manipulated by a seasoned criminal who used her vulnerabilities against her. This should be terrifying. Well, but then others viewed her as a willing participant who was all in. She crossed ethical boundaries for financial gain and personal attention. This case also reignited discussions about workplace training and safeguards in environments like prisons. Critics pointed to the lack of specialized training for staff to recognize and resist manipulative tactics from inmates. While basic security protocols are standard, the psychological dimension of inmate to staff interactions often remains unaddressed. So how's that? Many questioned whether Hatfield might have been better prepared to resist Whittingham's influence if such training had been in place. And the media, they played a significant role in shaping the narrative as well. Some outlets focused on Hatfield's actions, portraying her as a cautionary tale of what happens when professional boundaries are crossed. Others delved into Whittingham's history, highlighting his manipulative tendencies and the systemic failures that allowed him to exploit a vulnerable individual. Public reaction to Hatfield's sentencing was equally polarized, as you can imagine. Some felt her 10-year prison sentence was appropriate, given the harm caused by her actions. And others, they argued, though, that it failed to account for the coercion she experienced. This wasn't all her. The case prompted broader discussions about proportional punishment and whether the legal system adequately differentiates between willing participants and those acting under undue influence. And finally, the introduction of spice into HMP Lindholm added another layer. This synthetic drug, already notorious for its devastating effects, became a symbol of the systemic issues within the prison system. This case underscored the challenges of controlling contraband and protecting the health and safety of both inmates and staff. This case is unique. To truly understand it, it is crucial to examine the very unique challenges faced by those working in prison environments. It's very unique to this case. Settings here designed to rehabilitate and confine individuals who have committed serious crimes, right? The dynamics within these facilities are complex, and the contrast between staff and inmates, opposite ends, right? Well, it creates both structure and tension. On paper, professionals like Amy Hatfield and inmates like Joseph Whittingham occupy opposite ends of the spectrum. Hatfield was a nurse trained to care for individuals in a high-pressure environment, while Whittingham was serving time for criminal activity. But despite their differences, the boundaries between these two individuals at opposite ends, just opposite worlds, the boundaries between them blurred. And this highlights a vulnerability that is unique to high-risk professions that we don't see in every crime, right? Not in this way. Statistics show that prison staff, including nurses and guards and administrators, they face higher than average rates of stress and burnout and emotional fatigue. According to studies, up to 20% of correctional staff report experiencing symptoms of PTSD due to the demands of their job. Okay? This is a serious condition due to the demands of their job. This stress can erode professional boundaries, especially in prolonged interactions with manipulative individuals. Manipulation tactics are a documented strategy among inmates. Inmates like Whittingham often exploit psychological weaknesses, using charm and sympathy, even intimidation, to influence staff. A report from the U.S. Department of Justice highlights that manipulation of prison staff, it's a common challenge, with nearly 30% of surveyed correctional employees reporting instances of inmates attempting to coerce or manipulate them. Hatfield's case underscores this reality. It's happening. It is out there. Now, as a nurse, her role required her to engage with inmates on a personal level, often under the guise of care and trust. This gave Whittingham an opportunity to establish a connection and slowly erode her professional boundaries. What makes this case particularly striking is the complete reversal of roles here. Hatfield, entrusted with the health and safety of inmates, found herself compromised by one. The contrast between her initial position and her eventual conviction highlights the extraordinary circumstances of her downfall. This raises questions about how institutions can better protect their staff. Is it their responsibility? Could specialized training in recognizing manipulative tactics or psychological resilience have made a difference in this case? What safeguards should be in place to prevent similar incidents? These are questions that extend beyond Amy Hatfield, challenging how we approach high-risk professions altogether. If you were going to send in a psychologist or psychiatrist to meet with Mr. Whittingham, what sort of things would they know to protect themselves that Amy did not? Because this happens. These meetings are happening all the time, as we also have prison staff that are meeting with prisoners every day and more often as well. So, high-risk professions, are people protected? It is something to think about. As we unravel the final threads of this case, it's clear that the story of Amy Hatfield and Joseph Whittingham defies easy categorization. This is not a simple case of guilt or innocence here. This is a mess of blurred boundaries, psychological manipulation, and systemic gaps that left a professional vulnerable to exploitation. Was Amy Hatfield a victim, someone who fell prey to a manipulator in an environment where the power dynamics were already stacked against her? Or did she make conscious decisions to betray her role, knowing the harm her actions would cause? This case raises critical questions about the systems in place to protect individuals like Hatfield. While there's rigorous care when trained psychologists or psychiatrists work with inmates, staff like prison nurses are often left to navigate these relationships without adequate support or training. They didn't get a PhD in psychiatry. Shouldn't those on the front lines of such high-risk environments receive specialized training to guard against manipulation? And what about Joseph Whittingham's role? His manipulative behavior is undeniable, but does that lessen Hatfield's accountability? Or does it underscore the systemic failure to equip prison staff to handle individuals like him? Ultimately, this case forces us to look beyond the verdict. It challenges us to think about how justice is served, and not just in the courtroom, but in how we protect those tasked with upholding order in environments rife with risk and complexity. This case is a tangle of human choices, institutional gaps, and consequences that ripple far beyond the actions of two individuals. Amy Hatfield's conviction brings closure in a legal sense, but it leaves behind a trail of unanswered questions about the systems that allowed this to happen. Joseph Whittingham's influence over Hatfield was clear, but where does manipulation end and personal accountability begin? Hatfield's actions undeniably caused harm, yet her circumstances challenge us to consider the complexities of guilt and coercion in environments designed to rehabilitate and punish. The broader implications of this case cannot be ignored. How can institutions better protect their staff from falling victim to manipulation? Should there be stricter safeguards and enhanced training for those working in close proximity to inmates? These are not just questions for this case. They're critical issues for every prison system worldwide. And now it's your turn to decide. Was Amy Hatfield a victim of manipulation, or did she make deliberate choices that led her down this path? Did the legal system balance justice with understanding? Or does this case highlight deeper flaws in how we assign responsibility? Remember, in the court of public opinion, the verdict is always open to interpretation. Thank you for joining me in True Crime, the Court of Public Opinion. Stay safe out there. Stay curious and ask the difficult questions. And until next time, this is Alexis Knight.